Greetings to those of you who are tuning in on YouTube, video, audio, or those are the two choices, but I'm thrilled that you are attending in this way. And also, I'm so grateful to be able to be the principal presider of the Caron Chapel service and to have a chance to be with you this morning, as it's so often my Sunday morning. Something particularly about how I feel about that today. I don't know how to put it in words. The message theme for today, which I can never sort of complain too much about because I created the sequence of themes, but today's theme is hope. And too much to say, too little time. Hope. I first started thinking about it in relationship to addiction recovery at a time in which I identified as an atheist. And I was early in my sobriety, and I had my on-ramp to the 12 steps, to recovery is through the 12 steps, which begin with Alcoholics Anonymous in the 1930s. And today there are choices that people have to do other than the 12 steps to support their recovery, rather than just going it alone. But for me, that's how I developed my sobriety and these long decades of my persisting abstinence, which I'm so grateful for. The 12 steps continue to be terribly important for me. So I've had a series of sponsors that's a part of the 12-step movement, and one of my early sponsors suggested to me that a way of learning about the 12 steps was to understand in this person's mind that each of the 12 steps had a spiritual principle behind that. So these are one-word principles associated with the 12 steps. And I would later learn that there's some contention about, first of all, whether that's a fair claim, and secondly, which principle applies to which step. For example, for the nerds among us, the word surrender is sometimes associated with the first step and sometimes with the third step. So there's not necessarily an authoritative mapping of spiritual principles onto each of the 12 steps. That said, I think the association of the spiritual principle of hope with the second step is really strong. People think of the second step in the AA model of the 1939 authorship as a step in which hope captures the inherent spirit and is crucial and involved. So, and I think it's sort of self-evident why a person who is stuck in addiction might benefit from hope. At the same time, hope is a larger subject area, right? It's addressed in philosophy and theology and poetry and anthropology and neurobiology. You may not know that, but there's a lot said about evolution and hope as an evolutionary mechanism in the human person. It's like when plants in stressed conditions flip their gender. That's an outdated notion. We impose gender on plants because the anthropocentricness of human beings does that. But anyway, the plant biology flips from one type to another in order for the plant to survive. So this is this survival imperative that's believed to be sort of part of the natural world and the flora and fauna, and human beings have this capacity to conjure hope in the most extraordinary times, right? And what comes to my mind, it wasn't in my outline, but these terrible situations where we see earthquakes and people live for 3 to 4, 5 days without food and water, holding on to hope that they might be rescued. And then you see the young person or the elderly person pulled out of the rubble, and sure enough, what got them through was just some refusal to die. And that's in you. It is. I believe it's instilled in us as much as I believe there is inherent goodness in the human person, no matter how wonky and horrid our behavior may become. I think we are inherently beautiful, and I also think we are inherently constituted for this thing that human beings do, which is to hope in pretty much any and all circumstance. So you might be sitting here or listening to the message and thinking, yeah, but I remember that time when I felt like hope was gone. And I want to stop there on my message's journey today with you. And think for a minute in this testimony that people have to periods of time and moments in their lives where hope feels absent. And I think there's things going on in that. And I was attending a 12-step meeting this week, and I heard somebody say something, and it hit me because I was like, wow, that is so relevant to this message that I'm trying to craft. And what the person said, as I heard it, was that hope without follow-through is fantasy. Now that's a depressing ass thought. But it's sadly really important, right? So if I have hope and I am either unable or unwilling to move in the direction of its fulfillment, then it just is this abstract notion of possibility. But it's not correlated with transformation and exit from suffering. So I do think, and you know, we have the person who is in the rubble who dies, and we have the person who completes suicide, or we have people whose despair or circumstances don't manifest in the fulfillment of whatever hope they may hold on to. And there's actually, this is a sidebar, there's an observation in theological studies that when hope isn't manifesting in the present, human beings as societies tend to conjure hope in the eternal future, right? So this is eschatological and apocalyptic hope. Like, I learned that first in reading the book of Daniel, a Hebrew Bible book in which people are in exile and they have no sort of real basis on which to hope in the present, and they hope that in the future, beyond the end of time, somehow crap works out. You know what I was going to say. And so, but I think in a more concrete and important way for the patient and family members who are here, hope somehow may speak its little voice in us and feel unanswerable for two reasons. Inertia and panic. So, and I'm associating that, those are words I'm allowed to use as a spiritual care practitioner because there are words that I'm not supposed to ascribe to our patients because I'm not a diagnostician. But I'm associating inertia with depression, and I'm associating panic with anxiety. And you all probably hear those two words a lot, right? Because they're very much in our common parlance. But anxiety and depression, sort of like PTSD, are actually they're diagnostic terms in mental health care that have criteria which people merit the diagnosis and either sort of mild, moderate, or severe. But at another level, I'm not a big fan of these diagnostic labels because I also think that inertia is really how depression manifests, is this really stuckness and a difficulty even to, like dress or get out of the house or, and we tend to tell people it would help you if you would exercise, and the person who's in that pit of clinical depression is like, yeah, thanks, really helpful. And that's their inability to exert force to come out of this. And I think it's a very real thing. And similarly, in fact, I just had an opportunity to intersect with somebody who was talking about trauma really quite immediately. And trauma is a real thing. All human beings experience traumatic events, but this thing that they call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a diagnosable and measurable, mild, moderate, severe manifestation of a mental health disorder. And in its extremes, people freeze. They can't function, or they function in these bizarre loops where they act out, like anxiousness and those of us who are not in a PTSD loop wonder why they can't just, come back to, hello. And it's these kinds of derailments that inhibit hope's call to be answered. So let's bring it right to the circumstance of an addiction circumstance. So let's say I'm a person who's drinking uncontrollably, and I meet someone. This is how it happened for me. I met people previous to my entrance into sobriety who had testimony that they had been drinkers like me, And I say drinking because there's a lot of drugs and all that sort of stuff, but I just want to keep it simple for the example point. So I met people who had had drinking problems, like my drinking problem, who were now abstinent, successfully abstinent for long periods of time. I had my godfather was abstinent for years and years. When he and I had a conversation about it while I was still drinking, I had a really good friend, Richard, and he was sober a long time, years, and he said, I did it in AA, but I don't really, like whatever, sort of left the 12-step room somewhat behind, reckless, but okay. That's a lot of people's testimony. And then I had a friend and a sibling who had both gotten sober nearer term. So this was weird information that was inserted in my reality when I had the complete confidence that I could not stop. I really believed I couldn't stop. In fact, I attempted to stop one 24-hour period, and then I thought, if I drink by midnight, I've stopped 24 hours. That's tragic. And then my spouse at the time said at 10 o'clock, you might as well fix a drink because, you sort of made it. And I was like, oh, thank God. But in my mind, I was like, oh no, I am incapable of really making it through an entire diurnal cycle without the poison that I knew was killing me. Stay on track. So these things, the depression and anxiety or the inertia and the fear, sometimes very extreme forms of it, make it very, very difficult for some of us to move in the direction that hope calls us. But something does also allow this sobriety thing to manifest and recovery to manifest. So not everybody in this room is here hoping for sobriety. Some of you are hoping that your loved one will get sober, right? And that's another torment. It's a flip side of the same coin, and it's its own misery. God bless you. And I've been both. I've been the family member who's watching somebody like descend in the pit of addiction, and then I've been myself in the pit of addiction, needing to find capacity to move out of it. So what it looks like for the family is often like deciding we have a problem and setting boundaries and referring to treatment, right? That's the move out of paralysis that the family can make. And what the move of the individual can make is a thing like to go to a meeting or to stop one day at a time or to get into treatment or whatever. That's the thing where this is the hopes manifestation that we're praying for. And I think there's also two things that can be observed as, I haven't done research on this, so I've just come to a break. It's 6 days putting this message together. But I think there's two things that I think go with the way in which the fear and anxiety can be, the anxiety and the inertia can be overcome in our common experience. We see them here all the time. And one is love. So I think love helps people who are stuck in the conviction that the hope's call that they hear and can't answer. Love is this powerful tonic that helps reduce the barrier and empower movement towards healthy boundaries, treatment, sobriety, putting down the entrapping situation. And love manifested for me in these people, like I was saying, my godfather, a sibling, a friend, two friends, and their care for me wormed its way into my awareness to cause me to have to question this inner conviction that I will never get sober. And I thought I was going to die drinking, and I thought I was going to die before my dad did. I was pretty sure I was not even making it 40. My dad died at 54. I was 28 when I got sober, and I do totally believe that it was Richard, Wade, my godfather, my brother James, and I lost the name of the fourth person, but these people who had an impact on my life, and that I was incontrovertible to me. I knew that they had been drinkers, and I knew they were not drinking. And it was like, this is like the dangerous fact, ruh-roh, because I wanted to be able to explain why I couldn't. And there was no way I could explain why I couldn't when they could, right? I'm a human being just like they are, so it was like, yeah, internal conflict. And, this is when the robot goes, and the wires fuse, and stuck. And there's another thing that emerges in my journey that also is a power that helps people who are struggling to move in the direction of Hope's call, which is faith. And I'm always amused at how challenging I find it to talk about faith in this room, but I know why, because we often have a lot of people who are identified the way I used to 35 years ago, which is as atheist and as agnostic, and also we have a lot of people who are religiously wounded who come here, and so the word faith has all these connotations or whatever, but I think faith is found in a lot of non-religious and quasi-religious contexts, and I think it's also a really important discussion that we shouldn't avoid just because it's challenging and problematic for many. So, the people who know me well know one of my favorite sources for this kind of narrative is J.R.R. Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings. And I know people don't think of that as scripture, but man, I think it comes close. So, in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and if you know the history why, there's reasons why that claim could be partially supported. Anyway, there's this thing that happens in one of the, I think it's in the second of the way the story is chopped up into three, into a trilogy. It was actually 6 books to begin with. 2 of the characters are trying to fulfill the hope that is in them against all odds. That's one of the things that's so great about this Tolkien narrative, The Lord of the Rings, is that this is the essence of it, is all the characters who are on the side of good are trying to get something done that is impossible. Any reasonable person would say it can't happen, and yet they attempt to do it anyway. It's freaking beautiful. And so they start out as 9, they end up getting split up 7 and 2, and the 2, Frodo and Sam, are also, there's a 10th tag-along, Gollum, and Gollum's chasing behind them, and they get to this place. This is how bad of a nerd I am, I can tell you which book it is, and they're at the pass of Cirith Ungol, and they plow the steps of Shelob's lair, and they're inside Shelob's lair. It's pathetic. I've read these things and studied them so much, like to me it's sacred to me. And so they're in this dark moment, just horrendous moment. And when one of them remembers, Sam actually is the one who remembers, that previously they had been given this thing. It's called a star glass at one point, but it's also called the phial, Phial. I didn't know there was another word for vial, but the phial of Galadriel. It's this little vial, and it has the capacity, in the magic of the story, to bring the light of a star, the star of Elendil, into a dark place. And Sam and Frodo have both been told by Galadriel, take this thing and take it with you, it will be a light in dark places. And so here they are in a dark place. Tolkien is great at depicting miserable situations. And so there's this big ugly spider, and there's this dark cobwebby cave, and it's just like awful, and everybody's like, oh, if you allow yourself to be in the story without knowing that it's gonna like work out, and you enter the mystery of the story, you just think, oh, this is a bad moment. And then Sam's like, wait, the vial! And so Frodo reaches into his pocket or whatever, and he pulls it out, and he starts just like timidly, sort of like songs sometimes begin, like, and then all of a sudden it starts shining this bright light, and the next thing you know, it scares the daylights out of this horrid creature that is threatening them and gives them a moment's pause and the capacity to move towards the fulfillment of their hope. So it's not a relational love that creates the power that brings a change in the circumstance, but it's a transcendent thing. It's a thing that goes, and it's a little bit beyond reason. We call it magic and magical realism in today's fictional narratives or whatever. But I have to say, I experienced. I mean, obviously this thing's not glowing in my hand, but I experienced more than rational things happening in the world all the time. I do not know how to ascribe various events that happen in our world all the time. I cannot chalk them up to randomness and mere chaos. I could spend the next hour telling you about synchronicities that have happened over and over and over again. And I believe if you're not looking for them, you will miss them. And if you start looking for them, you will start seeing them. The world is not as stochastic, not as Brownian, not as frickin' random as the cynic in me used to believe. So, this is power that can be accessed by the family and the person in addiction. Is power that comes not through the godfather or the friend or the person that you know who got sober or the interventionist or the loving treatment team, but power that comes outside of and beyond what we know to explain. And it is referred to, interestingly, in the Tolkien story with light. It occurred to me, like in Buddhism, you have 3 jewels. And I don't know if any of you know them, but it's the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma, right? And so the Dharma are the teachings. This is one of the jewels of Buddhism that changes people's lives and helps people in their reality of suffering. And the Dharma is the teaching. The Sangha is the community. That's the love. So there's information, there's love, and then there's Buddha, which is enlightenment. And, oh, did you hear that? The word enlightenment. So there's an illumination and this metaphor of light and shadow that captures something about what happens in this dynamic of seeking the capacity to move out of despair and to act on our hope and to move in the direction of positivity. And another place I had in my outline, I will shut up in a minute or two, is the 23rd Psalm, one of the treasured texts of many, many persons over many, many lives. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down. We know this text, some of us. And it speaks of the valley of the shadow of death. Was there ever better poetry to capture the place of despair than this ancient Hebrew songwriter? The valley of the shadow of death. And isn't that a place that many of you have been? Doesn't addiction take us right to that freaking place? The valley of the shadow of death. And what is it that will enter that world? We need light to enter the shadow, and it overcomes it. The light overcomes the darkness. This is the reality, and it's interesting if you study physics or you study theology and various traditions. Many traditions say that good and evil are not evenly balanced, that evil is the absence of good, or that's maybe an overstatement, but in any case, that the light, this is true, like in an entire vacuum of nothingness, the small presence of a tiny amount of light fills the entire nothingness. So light is, and it's the light that is real and overcomes the shadow, which is this absence. So I just don't know where this message is meant to land for who in this room. But I also have this weird sense that there are those of you who are really struggling and don't know, like, did we make the right move to come here? Are we in the right place? Can this happen? This is the 6th treatment. This is the 11th treatment. This is the 3rd treatment. Or this is the 1st treatment. But, it took 300 attempts to talk to our loved one to get them to even freaking come here, and they're already threatening. We're leaving, I'm not staying. And that doesn't ever happen here, right? And then this miracle takes place here on a routine basis, which is that all of a sudden people like Bill and Forrest are coming back to the Magic Mountain to get a coin that celebrates 1 year or 8 years, or somebody just said hi to me that hasn't been here in a while, but I think he's been coming to this place since Father Bill was, ranting and raving from this spot. And so hope comes alive here as a routine phenomenon, and it comes alive in people. If I ask the staff members to tell you that we can tell who will and won't make it, they would laugh. They will tell you we do not know who does and doesn't make it, but one of the really great things that's happened in the last 5 or 6 years is that we've been able to sort of find out that we were undershooting what we believed were the outcomes that happened here. Outcomes happen here in amazingly significant numbers. Way more than half of our patients do what I would call really well. Does that mean they leave and they never touch another substance again? No, that's a bad measure of an outcome. What what is true is that 85% or more of our patients don't need treatment again. Which is, from the insurance company standpoint, the home run. But also from our standpoint, it's like great, right? And this is at 90 days and 1 year, and at 2 years, still the numbers are persisting. So we've been checking these outcomes with our insurance providers, and at 2 years, and interestingly, just to brag a little bit, Caron outpaces other providers. So less of our patients leaving need more treatment than peer facilities. It's not fair to call them peer facilities because they don't track the outcomes that we provide. But the fact that you ended up here, count your lucky stars, or congratulate yourself because you picked a good place, or God bless you if you're paying for it yourself. But you're this is good, this is money well spent, because it turns out that you'll have less probability of having to spend that money again. So there's reason for hope here. You can taste it and you can feel it, especially if you come to chapel. This is the thought in my heart, and then I really will shut up, is I am so fortunate to be a staff person who gets to stand here and do this particular job. Because we have people who live in the frickin' trenches. Our nurses who are in the detox ward, and our primary therapists who, like, their job every day in and day out is to go into the shadow of death with the client. And then at 28 days, like, have a plan for them and go and do well, like, God bless you. And then they don't know. Half the time we don't know. Do they do all right or do they not? And then sadly, what we do report back is when we hear of the overdose or the suicide, which is so, it's like really painful to those of us who have invested our love and light, right? So I said I was going to be quiet. Love and light are the antidotes by which hope can be moved forward and no longer be fantasy, in spite of the terror and inertia that you may feel in the shadow of death in which you reside. So if you are trapped and don't know how to move, go to the love and the light. And the hope that is within you, which I believe is within you, will find its fulfillment. God bless. Thank you so much. Thanks.